Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing the behavior and body language of Nicolae Miu. Nicolae Miu is at the center of the Apple River stabbing case. This led to one adolescent being killed and several others being injured. Before we get started with this analysis, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to remind you this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, the verdict is not out yet. At the time of this recording, the jury is currently deliberating, and I've been on vacation, so I'm a bit behind. If there are other videos related to this you want me to do, we'll talk about that later. Last thing before we get started is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. So what we're looking at today is the video leading up to the stabbing. We're not going to be watching anything graphic. We're not going to be watching anybody get stabbed, but I do want to warn you, this is intense. But like I said, we're not getting to any of the graphic stuff. Let's just jump right in. All right, so you can see Nicolae Miu here. He's reaching down. It looked like he had his scuba gear in his mouth. You see these other adolescents around him. I'm going to break this down and I'm going to explain some important psychological aspects of this as we continue to go on. Now, if you look at his face right here, now oftentimes when we think of people looking angry, we think of the angry brow, they bare their teeth, sometimes they jut out their chin. We're not seeing that on his face right now. And so when you're thinking of these adolescents that are antagonizing him, they might not fully appreciate whether or not he's angry at this point, but we're not seeing that on his face. So no visible signs of anger yet.
What the hell are you talking about? Get away from us! What? What's going on with y'all homie? He's on camera. Guys, let's tripping.
So if you continue to look at his body language, we're still not seeing, he's not puffing out his chest, he's not putting his chin up, he's not doing any of these aggressive acts that we would anticipate from somebody who's about to commit an act of violence. Let's watch this again, then we'll keep going.
What's going on with y'all homie? He's on camera. Guys, let's tripping. He's on 4K. Yo, the new iPhone got that good.
All right, so he turned his back to them. Now, that's a vulnerable way to stand. That would be something you would likely do with somebody you don't expect to be a threat at this point. You wouldn't typically turn your back on somebody that you think is going to be harmful to you. So I would presume at this point, he's not anticipating that anything's going to happen.
He's on 4K. Yo, the new iPhone got that good quality.
So now you see him pointing. Now pointing, I know this is not the most aggressive act in the world, but that does suggest that he is feeling some degree of intensity at this point. When we point at people, we typically do it because we're feeling agitated. This is really the first clue into how he's probably feeling at this point.
What do you? Yo, the new iPhone got that good quality. What do you say? Yeah, what the hell? Who is this? Yes.
So obviously the volume of these guys would have an agitating effect. So the question is, and what we're really going to be looking at, is his reaction. Was the stabbing a reaction to feeling like he needed to defend himself, or was it a reaction to feeling humiliated? Two very different possibilities, and both would have very different outcomes in terms of how the jury perceives it.
For the culture! Who is that? For the culture! Who is that? Who the hell is this?
He still has a somewhat blank expression on his face. We're still not seeing overt anger. So whether or not he's feeling it right now intensely, we still don't know. But as the other people are watching him, now it could have been that it would have escalated regardless. It could have been that they would have retaliated with anger if he had shown it. But he's still not demonstrating the level of fury that he may have been experiencing at this point.
He said he was looking for a little girl! You're looking for a little girl!
So the hands on the hips, this tends to be a dominant stance. So this is trying to show some level of dominance. So as these guys are insulting him, this is causing him to put his hands on his hips. This is causing him to take a dominant stance.
Yeah! That's exactly what he said! Weirding us out! I even have that part on camera, did I? Some young ass kid! What the hell is this guy's problem, bro? We're trying to have fun!
So as you can see, there's an uncomfortable smile here. I think the embarrassment, the humiliation is probably really setting in at this point. I've never been through anything like this. I can't imagine what it would be like to be surrounded by people mocking you and making fun of you while you're by yourself. I'm sure that would be humiliating. But the question is, did he react out of humiliation, or did he react because he genuinely believed he had to defend himself? Let's keep going. Now, when somebody genuinely feels threatened, we tend to go through 3 stages. We go through freeze, we go through flight, and then we go to fight. This is just the way the body works. All right, so he wasn't trying to leave yet from what we could tell, but he was surrounded by people. He was pushed in the water, he was slapped. Now, when you think about this from a survival perspective, let's watch this right here. So briefly, his face went underwater. Now, when you look at how shallow this water is, I think a lot of people would think it's not that dangerous. You could just stand up. But I think when you're in this situation, when you're surrounded by people, when you've been submerged, even briefly, it could trigger that fight or flight system pretty strongly. But once again, this could also be that this is a humiliating situation, not one that where maybe he felt that he truly was going to have to defend himself, but one where he started feeling angry. Let's keep going. We'll talk more. This is where it starts to get a lot more complicated as far as whether or not he truly felt the need to defend himself. He was pushed over. It looks like there's somebody standing behind him. He's basically got people standing all around him. And when you feel like you cannot escape, you're far more likely to trigger that fight response, especially because when he tried to get up, he got pushed over again. Let's watch this part again. So you can see the look right here. Right here, he does look angry. He seems to be baring his teeth a little bit, although that's a little bit hard to tell. But the fact is that he's been pushed into the water. He can't get up to escape right now. Now, I'm not saying that he would. He may be angry, and he may be coming after them at this point. Because at this point, I think that he's actually pulled out a knife. So whether or not that's to defend himself or just because it's an angry reaction to being humiliated by these guys, that's obviously what a jury is deciding right now. So the question is at this point, has he had long enough to assess whether or not he could escape, or is this a genuine reaction to fear that he could be submerged underwater if he was slapped, if he could get knocked out? One of the reasons you don't mess with people is because you don't know their histories. Now, there could be aspects of Nicolae Miu's history that we don't know. I don't know what his trauma history is, whether he's got a combat history, all of these things. With this type of history, that can inform how people are going to react. Once again, if it's a legitimate self-defense situation, his life experience is going to play a huge part in what he would consider a threat. I think most people, if your average person walking around the river was in this situation, they would be embarrassed. They would be angry at the situation. They might go call the police, but they're probably not going to feel the need to literally fight their way out of it. But depending on the situation, some people might actually feel that way. Now, the extent of the damage that he did, the amount of people he hurt, that's where the pure self-defense angle starts to seem a little bit softer, where it becomes a little bit more challenging. So we're going to stop here because I don't want to show any of the violence. I don't think anybody needs to see that. Obviously, those videos are available because they were shown during the trial. But the goal of this was for you to get a chance to see some of what led up to it and whether or not this was a reaction to feeling humiliated and being angry, or whether or not he genuinely was concerned for his life. Based on everything we're seeing, it doesn't seem impossible that he may have genuinely been concerned that he could have drowned or been pushed under the water with that many people, with people surrounding him and not being able to flee. That can be a very disorienting situation. However, given the extent of the violence he engaged in, it becomes a much, much harder argument. One of the really big challenges here is that the young adults had their arms up, that they were surrounding him in some sense, that they were pushing him in the water, that they slapped him when he was in the water. And this, in a very real way, depending on who it is, could trigger a very strong self-defense response. Would it be one to the extent that of what happened at Apple River? I wouldn't typically expect so. But at the same time, I do think in a very real way that there very legitimately could have been a very strong fight or flight response happen during all of this time. But once again, as I said, it's also possible that it was just so embarrassing and so humiliating that he acted out violently. Hopefully this has helped you better understand some of what we saw in this video. There's so much more we could cover, and if there's other videos you want me to analyze, like his testimony or anything like that, please let me know in the comments below. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.